The Game Awards recently revealed that Final Fantasy XVI is being nominated for Most Anticipated Title of 2023. And seeing as though Final Fantasy XIV is being nominated for both Best Ongoing Game and Best Community Support, I felt it was high time to educate the masses on exactly what is coming our way. In this video, I'm going to discuss some exclusive news and details surrounding Final Fantasy XVI, the team that's working on it, and why I believe that Final Fantasy XVI is going to be the best Final Fantasy ever made. Like, ever. Ever. After watching the Ambition trailer for around, I don't know, the 100th time, I found myself overwhelmed with excitement. Finally, after years of playing Final Fantasy XIV, I can induct more members into my cult. Yes. No. I mean, finally, there's going to be a single-player game that shows exactly what a AAA title should be. A game that will have zero issues. No battle pass. No predatory microtransactions. And it won't be some half-baked push-to-release to appease investors piece of shit. Final Fantasy XVI will be a complete masterpiece and return the franchise to its throne. Yoshida and the development team for Final Fantasy XIV's award-winning expansion Heavensward have effectively assembled a guaranteed win. If you're thinking any team can fail, you're being hyperbolic, well, you're wrong, and you likely haven't played Final Fantasy XIV. And that's fine. I have to be fine with that, you have to be fine with that, you're not alone. Considering that Final Fantasy XIV is an MMO, the majority of people probably don't have the time or motivation to invest in such a game. I mean, most people have social lives. But that's exactly why I made this video. You may be asking, why are you comparing an MMO to a single-player game? Well, many Final Fantasy cult players and I would say that Final Fantasy XIV is not your typical MMO, but instead a single-player experience with an MMO attached. Final Fantasy XIV is beloved by its players. Clicking through videos on YouTube, you're sure to find videos about how Final Fantasy XIV has changed people's perspective on gaming, cured the bubonic plague, or created world peace. The team making Final Fantasy XVI are the same people that made Final Fantasy XIV one of the most impactful and revered games over the last decade. So let's dive right into this and find out who's responsible for what's going to be the best Final Fantasy game ever. First up, let's discuss Naoki Yoshida, the producer and Square Enix's fixer. Yoshida has worked for Square Enix since the companies merged in 2003, but is best known as the director and producer who saved Final Fantasy XIV, turning what would be a failure into one of the most popular MMOs of all time and Square Enix's most profitable Final Fantasy titles ever made. According to the NoClip documentary on YouTube, Yoshida asked Square Enix executives to trust him in order to secretly develop a new version of Final Fantasy XIV while fixing and patching issues with the 1.0 version of the game. This was one of the most audacious and expensive plans for a video game studio to date, and it paid off in one of the biggest turnarounds in gaming history. Take a second to think about just how crazy that is. The amount of resources that must have took, the amount of creativity and determination that took to do. Could you imagine today companies like Bethesda going back and doing something like that for the shit launch of Fallout 76? Or EA somehow turning around Anthem and Battlefront 2? Though Final Fantasy XVI isn't an MMORPG, Yoshida has stated multiple times that he's wanted to work on the mainline Final Fantasy series ever since his days working on the Dragon Quest games. With the passion for Final Fantasy, his demonstrated understanding of what constitutes a good game, and his ambition to develop good games, Yoshida is the ideal choice to return the mainline series to its former prominence in gaming. Yoshida discussed his plans for Final Fantasy XVI in a recent interview. In the interview, he stated that Final Fantasy XVI should seem like a cinematic experience, a white-knuckled roller coaster ride. in which you, the protagonist, are offered a magnificent experience of an extended storyline, dramatic cutscenes, real-time fights, and gargantuan-scale icon confrontations. Naoki Yoshida isn't simply a developer, director, or producer. He's a gamer who plays his work and enjoys the reaction of the fan base. I think it's important for viewers to realize that. It's not unusual for Yoshida to get emotional, either when a game isn't progressing as planned or when he receives positive feedback from the fan base. When they revealed there was going to be a 2-week delay for the latest expansion Endwalker in last year's live letter, Yoshida became emotional, embarrassed, and regretful for anyone that had taken time off of work or made arrangements to play the game. He understands the gamers. Yoshida has genuine feelings for his team, the game, and the fans he serves. The Final Fantasy fan base is insanely fortunate to have Yoshida. He exemplifies everything a AAA developer should be. Recently, Yoshida announced that they had already finished Final Fantasy XVI. However, they wanted to spend the next year, yes, year, removing bugs and optimizing performance before its launch in the summer of 2023. When was the last time you heard developers not only being that transparent, but caring that much about the performance of their titles? I think it's really important to understand this emotional aspect, this emotional investment of Naoki Yoshida. How many times have you felt like the developers of your games just don't care about your opinions? That they're out of touch? That all they want to do is squeeze every red cent out of your wallet? And every single patch, every single update, every next iteration of a game is just getting further and further away from the core concept, the core reason why you started playing that game in the first place. If you haven't watched the no-clip documentary about Final Fantasy XIV, I highly suggest you do, because you can see just how dedicated this team is to making good games, especially Naoki Yoshida. Now, moving on to the director, Hiroshi Takai. Takai is one of Yoshida's most trusted colleagues and a member of the Final Fantasy XIV team. Takai has held a position as the assistant director for Final Fantasy XIV's first expansion, Heavensward, released in summer of 2015. You're going to start to see a pattern starting. Allegedly, before Bloodborne ever existed, Yoshida and Takai were hard at work on a Final Fantasy game with elements similar to those found in Bloodborne. However, they ended up having to put the project on hold to work on Final Fantasy's first expansion. Their work on the Final Fantasy XVI project started in the months following the release of Heavensward. Yes, they've been working on this game for almost 8 years. Takai has been a part of a small team of experts that was removed from Final Fantasy XIV to start working on the game under Yoshida's watchful eye. It shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone that Yoshida has entrusted Takai with the director's seat. The two of these guys have weathered the storm of Final Fantasy XIV together. They both helped build it back up and turn it into the game that it is today. So here they are, going into the next step, which is making their own Final Fantasy game, but this time from start to finish. Seeing how Final Fantasy XVI is trying to appeal to Western players through its dark fantasy approach and the action RPG gameplay, one can only think back to the time that they were working on a Bloodborne-like title just 10 years ago, feeling like we've come full circle. While it's doubtful looking at the gameplay that Final Fantasy XVI is going to play anything like a Souls-like game, Bloodborne, Neo, or anything of the sort, it's still interesting to think about the fact that that was one of their creative directions at one point. Personally, I would like to see some of that action RPG gameplay in Final Fantasy. Some type of real character growth outside of just leveling up. More choices in what abilities and what powers and what strengths your character has. Now, no game is complete without a good story, and Kazuto Mahiro is the creative force behind Final Fantasy XVI. Mahiro's storytelling skills are among Final Fantasy XVI's most valuable assets. As the primary scenario writer for Final Fantasy XIV, Mahiro worked on both A Realm Reborn and the Heavensward expansions. Note that one of the reasons why Final Fantasy XIV is such a beloved game is because of its story. Regardless of Final Fantasy XIV being an MMO, it's claimed by many that Heavensward is one of the best RPG stories ever written. Taking into account that both the Ambition and Dominant trailers for Final Fantasy XVI have visuals and dialogue that are strikingly similar to those found in Heavensward, Yoshida appears to be capitalizing on some of that old success from Final Fantasy XIV. When investigating for this video, I revisited many of Heavensward's most important story points and experienced the same flood of emotions that I had the first time while playing. Heavensward is one of the most unique narrative experiences I've ever had playing a video game. I can't quite put it all into words. It's well written, it's impactful, it's immersive. You feel like you're part of the story. Now, knowing that my hero is the one steering the story for Final Fantasy XVI, we can only expect that same level of masterfully crafted storytelling. Now, when talking about who makes a successful game, we're often talking about producers, designers, artists, story writers. However, I feel that there's one addition to this team that exemplifies Final Fantasy XVI's ambition: the translator. Koji Fox is an accomplished translator. Having worked on games like Final Fantasy XI, Dirge of Cerberus, and Final Fantasy Tactics, Koji is most known for his role in the localization of Final Fantasy XIV. Although some may just dismiss Koji as a means of translating languages, its significance really can't be overstated here. Remember when I was talking about how they're planning on targeting Western audiences with this game? Yoshida has planned to have Final Fantasy XVI written and dubbed in English first. Typically, this is not what they normally do. Usually, anytime they're releasing a Final Fantasy game, it's all in Japanese first, and then translated into other languages. I think this is incredibly interesting, as though this is something that they haven't done in the past. Square Enix is turning over a new leaf and trying to go in a different direction, trying anything that will work. And this time, I think it will. Due to Koji's work as a translator at fan festivals, and being the main vocalist of the official Final Fantasy XIV live band, the Primals, Koji has become something of a fan favorite in the game's player base. In the most heartfelt way, Koji continuously expresses his gratitude to the Final Fantasy XIV community and his team. This is yet again another member who holds emotional stake in the game. A team of people working on a franchise they love for the players they love. We've spent time discussing the people behind the game's intended story and path. However, one of the major obstacles for Final Fantasy XVI to overcome is its combat system. I mean, no matter how good a game looks or how great the story is, an action RPG is only as good as its combat. Final Fantasy XV's combat seemingly had good intentions. However, the combat just felt hollow. Weird camera angles made it really difficult to see enemies, and who the fuck's idea was it to just hold one button down to continuously attack enemies? Yoshida knew that the mainline series lacked depth in combat and in fun factor. So to solve this issue, he recruited Ryota Suzuki to bring Final Fantasy's combat system into the spotlight. Suzuki is best known as the combat director for Devil May Cry 5. If you've played DMC 5, then you know how big of a deal this is. If you haven't, well then I would like to present you with this. Taking a look at the trailer, we can see that the game's combat system takes a lot of inspiration from Devil May Cry 5. It's highly stylized, it looks fluid, and it looks really, really fast-paced. While it appears doubtful that we'll have additional party members to swap to, it looks as though we may be able to transition between the powers of the icons effortlessly during combat, similar to how you do weapon swaps in DMC. Players of Final Fantasy XV and the Final Fantasy VII Remake will likely agree that modern Final Fantasy is just better suited to action gameplay. I know that there's some naysayers out there, but guys, the days of turn-based combat are long gone. While Final Fantasy XV had its issues, I found teleporting around the battlefield, weapon swapping, and the fast use of magic fun and exciting. With the addition of Suzuki, Final Fantasy's combat is aiming to not only refine itself, but distinguish itself from all action RPGs. Now coming to one of the most important members of this team, Masayoshi Soken.
Do you know Nahi?
The composer. If you haven't listened to Final Fantasy XIV's music in the past, you need to. It's incredible. Soken's work is some of the best in video games. At the time that Yoshida was working on Final Fantasy XIV, Soken had already completed his takeover of the game's musical compositions. Fans not only recognize Soken for his musical compositions, but also for his stellar performances along Koji and the Final Fantasy XIV band, the Primals. With Soken as the composer for Final Fantasy XIV, the game has consistently been recognized for having some of the greatest video game soundtracks in video games ever. You may be wondering, why is music so crucial? Realize that every piece of music that's in Final Fantasy XIV was composed with a purpose, with every single encounter, zone, cutscene, and event in mind. This gives the game's story and gameplay an impact unlike any other game, and draws comparisons to games like Dark Souls, Elden Ring, Doom Eternal, and Nier Automata. If the music doesn't win you over, then the dedication will. Soken's heart defines this team, and proves the point that I'm trying to prove. During his time producing music for Shadowbringers and Endwalker, Soken spent most of his time in the hospital receiving chemotherapy. As it was revealed to fans during the last fan festival, Square Enix and Yoshida urged him to take time off, but Soken insisted that what he needed most was the happiness of the Final Fantasy XIV community. Soken was admitted to the hospital for medical treatment, but Square Enix ended up coordinating with the staff to ensure that he had a means to compose music while he was in the hospital. He started writing and he kept writing. With this level of commitment, do you think this game could fail? This isn't a case of battered gamer syndrome. I'm not saying they're different. This one won't hurt me. They're only charging for cosmetics. These are masters of their trade, genuinely compelled to bring you the greatest gaming experience possible. With the announcement that Final Fantasy XVI is only a 6-month PlayStation exclusive, soon all gamers will have the chance to play what may be a genre-defining experience. Now, this all might just seem like lip service to you. I'm talking about how great of people they are, how great of a team they're going to be. I'm talking about how much they love their community. But these are things that we normally don't look at, and the things that we don't normally discuss when we're looking at new games that are coming out or being made. Instead, we're looking at it as a faceless corporation that wants to take every red cent out of us and sell us fucking NFTs. Ha 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 ha. But this team is different. Legitimately. These are a team of people, a group of people that really care. They want this game to succeed. They want you to be able to feel the heart and soul that they put into this game. So, buckle in. This one's gonna be a wild ride.
Come then, show us the strength of your will.
Rise, ye crownless kings, a reckoning is upon you. A war of the icons.
One more thing before you go. These videos, they take a pretty good amount of effort to put together. So if you guys could, you fucking bit me. These videos take a good amount of effort to put together. If you guys could please drop a comment down below. Let me think what you thought about the video. If you guys want to hear anything more about Final Fantasy XVI, any other RPGs, or just gaming in general, subscribe and toss us a like. Other than that, see you guys next time. Why the fuck did I do that?